Um, so I just wanted to start with a small disclaimer explaining the sources I've used for this research. I'm more into, up until now, my research has mainly been on the medieval sort of architecture in Egypt and Syria. So it was quite surprising, well, not very surprising, but quite a new experience for me to work with court orders, newspapers, some of the diaries and records of Prince Mohamed Ali. So it's great, and it was a new experience for me. So the material that I've used is being very selective because I'm talking about a topic, there's a lot of information about it, and if you know that there is more, it's because probably there is. It's just that I thought for this particular lecture and for this particular topic, I had to be sort of discriminatory in choosing what I thought was probably the most appropriate in terms of sources. So we start with Prince Mohamed Ali. His date of birth is given to us by Zaki Fahmy, his biographer, as November the 9th, 1875, in Safaras. Although some of the Egyptian newspapers dispute the date and put forward a couple of months, but the date that's pretty much undisputable as the 18th of March 1955, so he lived for roughly 79 years. Mohamed Ali Tewfik was the son of Khedive Mohamed Tewfik and the grandson of Khedive Ismail from the Mehmed or Mohamed Ali family in Egypt. Mohamed Ali, of course, he was the viceroy of Egypt and made Egypt de facto independent from the court in Istanbul. The prince's mother was Amina Hanem el-Hami. The famous School of Fine Arts in Cairo during the early 20th century was named after her. The Madrasa el-Hamiyya lil-Funun al-Jamila, and his brother was Khedive Basil II, who reigned over Egypt until 1914. Mohamed Ali was the crown prince of Egypt for 3 times up until 1952. First for the time before the birth of King Farouk, when his brother Basil was the Khedive. Then he was a crown prince for a second time when Fuad was king, and then after Farouk became king, before the birth of Farouk's son Ahmed Fuad. Then, of course, the events of Gamal Abdel Nasser's revolution in Egypt during the summer of 1952 put things to rest in matters of Egyptian dynastic succession. From the purely architectural point of view, these details are very important to us because Prince Mohamed Ali had established in his palace a throne hall. Possibly, probably subconsciously, he was trying to rehearse his role as a king or Khedive. He's an international prince from a royal family, and apart from Egypt, he studied in Switzerland, Austria, and was fluent in many languages such as Turkish, French, English, German, and obviously Arabic. Mohamed Ali was a friend of the Islamic arts and influenced cultural life in Egypt during the late 19th century up until the 2nd and 3rd decades of the 20th century. Like his brother Khedive Basilmi, who died in exile in Geneva in 1954. Mohamed Ali Tewfik also expired in Switzerland. Despite a mausoleum in Cairo, his remains were never returned to Egypt. Maybe something to do with the fact that his mausoleum was dismantled for its marble and reused by Gamal Abdel Nasser for his own tomb. The prince wrote many books in French and German, some of them in Arabic, even though in his memoirs he recalls that he found it quite hard to write in Arabic. In particular, his travelogues, as we would describe them today, are of interest to us as they show that from an early age he'd acquired a taste for antiquarianism, as well as for the international dimension of Islamic culture, including Islamic antiquities, which in turn would explain the character of his palace. The travel books include the voyage to China and Japan, the flight to India, journey to Java, the trip to Australia, flight to South America, North America, a trip to North Africa, a summer trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a trip to Norway. Following are some examples of interest in cultures, objects, flora and fauna from his trip to Eastern countries. So for example, during his trip to Bosnia in 1906, on page 31 of his memoirs, the prince says that he bought many embroidered towels, textiles and embroidered fabrics the manufacture of the Serbian Muslims in Bosnia, and was impressed by the accuracy of the manufacturing quality. The markets, the souks in Bosnia also offered a range of fine-made daggers and swords. The prince visited the carpet industry in the country of Bosnia, and he was impressed also with the beauty and the use of natural dyes in it. He also described the carpet factory in Sarajevo as consisting of 4 large rooms for 50 Serbian women to weave on looms, and about 20 of the most skilled female workers were engaged in the silk weaving. In India, the prince went to see the gilded fabrics industry in the state of Bihar. He saw a Muslim family there called the family of the Ghaffur, who had 10 kids between males and females, and all of them worked with their father in this industry. And he bought from them a precious piece of cloth. Then we come to the palace. The palace of Al-Manial is situated in the island of Rauda, the Egyptians call it Rauda, which is famous from medieval times. Many historians probably say that the main reason for its fame, as historian Al-Makrizi told us, is that this island was formed before or during the Arab conquest of Egypt in Cairo, whilst other islands such as the islands of Dahab and Zamalek were created after Islam was introduced to Egypt. Makrizi also describes as a place where plants unique to Egypt were to be found. In the times of the Mamluks, a new village was established known as the Manual of the Mamluks, with an area of 270 acres and owned by the Sultan's Diwan. This village was created as a natural result of the development and urbanizations movement and its extension to the north of the island. During the era of Muhammad Ali, the island became a favorite with emirs and princes who built on it palaces, orchards, and gardens. Amongst the famous parks, there were parks of Ibrahim Pasha, the High Palace, and the Palace of Ain. Also, Ibrahim Pasha built the Sarai al-Manial, which can be considered a precursor of the Manial Palace. So now we come at a time of Prince Muhammad Ali. Prince Muhammad Ali purchased the palace from Mr. Jean-Claude Aristide Javedo on December 24th, 1902, as confirmed by the Registered Purchase Act in the Mixed Court of Egypt. And even though he started building on it in 1901, so that means that there was some sort of unwritten agreement with the seller that the palace was going to be sold to Prince Muhammad Ali. What we know before that is that Javedo himself was involved in a dispute in the 1890s with the estate of the Duc de Mont. The Duc de Mont actually used to own the palace, and in his will, instead of leaving it to his relatives, left it to Javedo. But the courts in Cairo assigned the property to Javedo, so he was consolidated as the legitimate owner before selling it to Prince Muhammad Ali. Prince Muhammad Ali was born in the Qasr al-Uqba, also known as what in English is the Kubbe Palace, in the northern suburb in Cairo, and it was used to lush gardens. And it's against this background of jungle and desert plants that the 5 detached palace buildings formed the core of the Manial Palace, with a prevailing Ottoman and Mamluk style. In all the buildings, Turkish ceramics from Iznik and Kütahya adorned the walls. The palace plaster wooden ceilings were decorated with intricate designs and works of art, from which hung giant Turkish chandeliers and glass mishkawat. And the darkened and confined arabesque living quarters and salons abound with Turkish jades and Persian carpets. It was in Manial Palace that the prince's guest, Camille Sansen, gave private recitals and composed certain pieces, including Piano Concerto No. 5 and the Egyptian. The total area of the palace is of 61,700 square meters, including 5,000 meters of built areas, about 34,000 meters for gardens, and about 22,000 meters for internal roads and others. The walls of the palace are built in the style of fortresses consisting of limestone and topped with guard balconies, and the buildings are a mixture of Ottoman, Andalusian, Mamluk and Fatimid architectural schools, and decorated in all aspects with Quranic verses, stained glass and marble. So the 5 main buildings are the reception sarai, which is the one on top in grey, the small triangle in grey. With 2 floors used for official receptions. One is designed in sort of more Syrian style, Levantine style, and the other one in Moroccan style. The residence Sarai, which is the one in orange, bottom right, dedicated to the establishment of the prince, where on the ground floor was allocated to receptions and dining rooms, and the prince's library, whereas the top floor was for bedrooms. The throne hall with an inclusion of reception rooms, a museum, which is the large triangle in grey, which includes a number of halls displaying collections of manuscripts, or Quranic manuscripts, and also secular manuscripts, carpets, painting, gold and silver artifacts, and others. The mosque, which is that white triangle top, was built in the late Ottoman styles, and on which I'll focus later during the talk. The clock tower next to the mosque, it's an Andalusian sort of Moroccan fashion. The fishing museum, which includes a group of birds, animals, stuffed reptiles, and some fishing tools. And the public gardens, which is over the actual internal precinct, with a rare collection of trees and tropical plants and flowers. The collection is very eclectic, from sacred textiles in Makkah, Medina, to some distinguished collections of Chinese and Japanese ceramics, rock crystals, very important collection of silver. The most important piece from it is a silver plate for eating silver plate, which was donated by King Louis Philippe of France to Muhammad Ali al-Kabir. After the death of Muhammad Ali, it was sold abroad and was found by Prince Mohammed Ali Tewfik during his trips to Europe, and brought back from England and installed as one of the objects in the museum. There was an endowment deed on the palace, a waqf stipulating that the income from 2,000 acres would account for maintenance and repairs of the buildings. So these are some of the interiors of palaces, the room within the Sarai. So on the right you see that the floor has got this sort of new Mamluk marble. The walls are normally covered with tiles of different sort of styles, but they're mainly from Istanbul. Again, these sort of like new Mamluk ceilings, wooden ceilings, and that's a new Mamluk brass door, the entrance to the Sarai. This is the reception Sarai. Again, you can see at the door this sort of various type of tiles. The residence rooms, you can just about see the two Izams from Mecca, Quasar Seika tiles. Bottom right, that's the Damascus room in its entirety. It's still there. I think it's got 2 of them. This is quite large, the other one's smaller. Front now with some, I gather, some very important Orientalist paintings as well. So here's the museum. It's not functioning at the moment, because I think I'd say probably 90% of the collections are in store. But from some of these pictures you can tell that it was obviously very heavy on textiles and carpets, glass, silverware. There's a lot of works and papers as well. He's a big fan of Ottoman calligraphy. So this is the sort of like more Maghreby clock tower, fantastic sort of stonework. And he was also a fan of red trees. He would go to places like Mexico and import cacti from there, and there's some passages, an exchange of letters with King Farouk, his cousin, and they were competing as for who was going to get the best sort of plants from all over the world. He travelled to Mexico, to Australia. He imported some of these banyan trees from India, the Ficus Bengalensis. It was quite eclectic. So before I go and talk about the mosque, I would also like to focus on the inscriptions at the entrance of the palace, because they omit the most important person with regards to the construction and design of the buildings. So these inscriptions talk about the palace being established by Prince Mohamed Ali, the son of the late Khalili Mohamed Tewfik, as a revival and tribute to Islamic art and architecture. So that was the intent. He was trying to revive Islamic art and architecture. And the decoration of the building was designed by Zionist the Prince and was carried out by the teacher Mohamed Afifi in 1348, i.e. 1949 of the Gregorian calendar. So Mohamed Afifi was a bit of a mystery, and I tried to find information about him, aided by some people like Doris Al-Saif and Professor Sami in Shams University. Nobody knew about him. And then last year I came across a professor at the University in Bern called Nadia Redouane, who's doing, she was writing a book on the arts and art education in Egypt during the first 20 years of the 20th century. And she told me that she knew about this chap, and he was one of the sort of most prominent art educators in Egypt. I mean, the book is a topic on its own, but it's very interesting because it talks about the sort of decolonization of art education in Egypt. And if you want to hear more, probably after the talk, we can talk about it. But it was interesting because he decided to have his name here. I mean, Prince Mohamed Ali obviously must have him in high sort of standings. And he appears again as a sculptor in the inscriptions of the mosque. So one person which is not mentioned here, but is mentioned in the memoirs of the prince and other records as being responsible for the execution of the design of the palace, is Mahmoud Fahmy, who is a graduate of the École Polytechnique from 1878, where he studied irrigation engineering, which includes construction of water plants and methods of irrigation, an important subject for the Egyptian economy at that time. After that, he went to France for 1 year, though I've not been able to find anything related to his séjour in France. But the date of 1878 is very important because it informs us that Fahmy graduated before the establishment of a course in architecture at the École, which happened in 1886. As part of his studies, he did attend a course unit in architecture, but it was hardly part of a full architectural course of studies. If someone wants to know more about architectural studies in Egypt in general, the story of the École Polytechnique in Egypt, probably the best work to read is that of Guylaine Allon, who's done extensive research on this topic. Mercedes Monet also successfully argued in many occasions that Mahmoud Fahmy was an important figure for us because he was not properly trained in architecture, but became the most important Egyptian architect during this period by working on numerous projects. For example, he was the only Egyptian on the panel for the construction of the new courthouse in Cairo in 1909, the Mahkamah al-Aliyah, which is now near Nasser metro station, if you know Cairo. Prior to the work at the Manuel Palace, at different times he worked in the Ministry of Public Works and then as the chief architect of the Ministry of Barakat, and is responsible for buildings in Cairo, mainly of a new Mamluk style, such as the Mosque al-Khawas in Wust al-Balad, near the Ramses area, and the impressive new wing of the ministry itself, which is in Wust al-Balad, in downtown Cairo, not too far from many other new Mamluk buildings, such as the Islamic Museum in Cairo. The concept of classical styles being resurrected in a way was generally a trend prevailing in Europe in the 19th and first half of the 20th century in Egypt. And it was present initially in the works of European architects, but also, in the case of Egypt, by Egyptian architects, most of them having an architectural experience of sort in Europe. Amongst the others, Mahmoud Fahmy, his son Mustafa, and Antonio Lachak were pioneers of this trend. Buildings reviving the classical styles adhere to the classical principle of clarity and regularity, but they also had a variable degree of modernization to them, and a sort of simplification of ideas. In Egypt, especially starting from the 1930s, there would be two major stylistic revivals. The Neo-Arabic, with subdivisions like the Neo-Mamluk and Neo-Fatimid, and the Neo-Pharaonic one. The Neo-Arabic one in particular was quite in-depth and will not stop at merely decorative features. But in case, for example, the house of Prince Yusuf Kamal, as an example that comes to mind, would also affect the interior. The Manuel Palace, initiated in 1901, preceded these tendencies of probably 30 years, and it was far a bigger sort of affair than the other examples. So today, the sort of focus on all the buildings of the palace is the mosque. These are external views. It's a mosque built in the late sort of Ottoman style, but it's got some sort of revival elements like the very high pishtak, the portal going above, way above the roof of the mosque. Some insertion of tiles, but then for us at the entrance, the most interesting features are these two foundation inscriptions. One of them, the one on the left here, although I think I switched them, because the one when you enter, this is actually on the right. It's pretty much a standard foundation inscription. It says that the mosque was established by Prince Muhammad Ali, the son of Mohamed Tewfik, in praise of Allah, like the great princes of the past who built mosques and temples next or within their palaces as he saw it. In his travels in various countries of the world, and himself undertook the task to build by collecting all his drawings and directly inputting them into the works, which will give a beautiful effect of his palace, and then other valedictory quotes. I mean, what he's trying to say here is that Prince Muhammad Ali would probably traveled to Muslim countries, had seen some of the palaces, and had noticed that there were palace mosques, i.e. mosques which were used by staff and the princes within the palaces, and he wanted to replicate that. Whether he really had drawings with himself, I've not been able to ascertain that. But it could be possible because he was an artist as well, so that he did have drawings, and he sort of, the finalization of the mosque was probably aided by the drawing, but it's not something that I would exclude. On the other side, there's a more interesting foundation inscription for us, because it gives us the name of the people who worked at the mosque, and presumably also in the other sort of buildings within the palace. And each oval sort of enclosure has got a different set of people, or one person, working in different media. The first one is probably the most important for us, because this chapter I'll tell you more about in a minute. And his name is Ahmed Kamel Effendi. So the inscription says that the writing of the calligraphy is his work. And he was the head of the calligraphers in Istanbul, the Reis of the team. The carpentry, drawings, and copperwork, it's a work of the teacher Mohamed Ibrahim Najjar. The carpets are the work of teacher Mohamed Ibrahim Talha. The marble works are from the teachers Hamad Sukkar and Mahmoud Saleh. The stone is the work of teacher Mohamed Afifi, of which we see his name before. And the tiles are all made in Istanbul, and the banna, the construction, is the work of teacher Mahmoud al-Banna and his children. This was written by Suleiman Effendi, the clerk of the department, and it's been done thanks to God Almighty in the year 1352 Hijri. So I've sort of highlighted in red the word Ahmed Kamel. Ahmed Kamel was also known as Ahmed Akik in Turkey. He's a very important figure, because he was the last Rais al-Khattatin, the last head of calligraphers in the Ottoman Sultanate. And although there are different theories, and I don't necessarily ascribe to any of them in particular, but many people, like my friend Barakat, for example, go against the theory that he himself, being probably the most
best paid and most important caliph in the Muslim world, why would he go to Cairo? So many people say that he went to Cairo after, obviously, the demise of the Ottoman Empire to find patronage for his work. But there are two problems with that. Well, first is that even if he did that, we know that although, of course, at a smaller scale, but people from generals from the Republic were still commissioning some of these great calligraphers. And second, we know that some of the work, some of the commission completed by Barakat and Kamel sort of precedes the demise of the Ottoman Empire. So he came to Cairo probably before that. As mentioned, he was born in Istanbul in 1861 and studied at the Salia Sultan Sibyan Maktabide, where Suleiman Effendi noticed his abilities. He then continued to study under Sami Effendi, and in 1884 received the Giosa or certificate as master calligrapher by Shukri Effendi. In 1881, when he began to work as an officer in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, he became known as Kamel. And due to his success in calligraphy, his duty was transferred to the Diwan Imayun Mohamed in Istanbul in 1894. In 1915, Ahmed Kamel Effendi was given the title of Rais al-Khattatin, and amongst his work are Musaf, Qur'ans, individual surahs like Surat al-Anam, the Melid al-Sharif, which is a calligraphic composition in honor of the Prophet, works on tiles, plates, and also mosque, like the mosque writings on the mihrab of the Prophet's mosque in the Medina, the writings in the mosque in Emmanuel Palace in Cairo, the mausoleum writings, inscriptions in the mausoleum of Mahmoud Mohtad Pasha, used to be very close to the palace, the tombstone of Sami Effendi, and in Egypt, apart from Prince Muhammad Ali, he was also commissioned by other members of the royal family, including Naziba Khanum, who at one point owned 14 works on paper by him, including a copy of Surat Anam. He died in 1941 in Fatih in Istanbul. So these are some of the slides. It's very difficult to actually photograph the interiors of the mosque because the keepers lead you from actually taking pictures with flash. On the right, you have the same composition in a white book. You see signature Kamel, both compositions on the right. He also did this work, calligraphy on the Kushk outside the palace, again with signature. This is very interesting. So it's exactly the same composition of the first part of the Islamic Declaration of Faith. So on the right, this is on paper. It's now in Abu Dhabi. On the right, this is a casket. It's a wooden casket, which unfortunately I haven't seen. I retrieved from this publication on Ahmed Kamel. And it's installed at the palace. Prince Muhammad Ali was aware of the implication that his palace might have had for the public and decided to donate it with his collection to the Egyptian government, providing that the state would make the complex turn the complex into a museum. He wrote 2 letters to the government, one exhorting politicians to establish a museum of Islamic art, which they did. In this letter, written in February 1935 to the Egyptian Prime Minister Tewfik he lamented the fact that the Egyptian government had spent millions of pounds on the Pharaonic Museum and that he was establishing the property museum, but did not have at that time a plan for a museum centered around the Islamic civilization. In another letter, again, he tells politicians of his intentions about the palace. So in May 11, 1939, this letter was read in the Supreme Court of Alexandria.
His Highness, he says, Prince Mohammed Ali, considers that all the buildings, gardens, objects, manuscripts within these buildings, which he collected during his lifetime, would be legally donated to the Egyptian state, as His Highness believes that everything shall belong to the public, to the Egyptian people. Therefore, he wishes that the government declares the buildings within the Manuel Palace a public museum and its garden a public park. So what we have here is Prince Mohammed Ali, which through his patronage, contacts, etc., manages to have le creme de la creme, some of the main protagonists of the swan song of Islamic art and architecture. Certainly the most prominent Egyptian architect and the most prominent caliph in the Muslim world. And I believe, especially in the case of Kamel, the calligrapher, they had to do that through nurturing this relationship. Although it's entirely probable that their relationship flourished after the demise of the Ottoman Empire, Prince Mohammed Ali visited Istanbul in many occasions, long before Kamel was made Rais al-Khattatin in 1915, and in many occasions he visited the office of the court calligraphers. So it's not inconceivable that the two had a working relation even before Kamel came to work on the palace in the 1930s. I'm being conservative here because some of the commissions, as I mentioned before, are dated from the 1910s. Outside the Manuel Palace, Prince Mohammed Ali had other heritage concerns. For example, he renovated the Mosque of Amr in Fustat, and also some of the structures in the Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem. I've not studied these renovations in detail, but I wouldn't be surprised if he used top craftsmen there too. With his love for contemporary and lost Islamic culture, Prince Mohammed Ali wanted to revive, as he mentioned in inscriptions, art and architecture that he believed had been lost. He did so through amassing also a collection of Islamic art. This went beyond the project of, say, Prince Yusuf Kamel, whose villa had an Arab salon filled with collections of Islamic art, which would have formed the core of the Islamic Museum in Cairo. Or even, say, the project of Omar Sultan, who was an amateur collector with similar aspirations. The conjuncture of architecture and Islamic art in the Manuel Palace was not so much finalized, nor did it stem from a commodification of Islamic art, nor by its interest in interiors like illustrated in the French houses in Cairo, for example. But it was an expression of self-awareness of an individual intent in replicating, reviving what he believed was an Islamic culture that had gone missing during the period. A dhikr, a remembrance of a time that would never return, and in its version, a sort of mini Islamic universal exposition, a festival of different epochs and geographies that never truly existed in the first place. Thank you.